We are back on NHL Now. Very busy day around the NHL. This trade included in the news as the Devils get goalie Jacob Markstrom from the Flames for defenseman Kevin Ball and a 2025 first-round draft pick that is top 10 protected. Now joined by David Pagnotta. He's from the Fourth Period. David, great to have you on. You're in Florida, getting ready to go to Edmonton. Good luck. Trains, planes, and make that connection.
Yes.
How'd the Markstrom deal come together?
Well, these two teams obviously very familiar with one another as part of these trade discussions that go back to, the middle of the season. You're effectively looking at end of January, in and around All-Star weekend, when these two teams started to get engaged and trying to make something happen. And at the time, Jacob Markstrom was willing, and clearly was now, to waive his no-trade clause for the New Jersey Devils. He anticipated a deal happening at that point. There were different parameters that were part of the deal. There was more retention that was part of it at the time. And ultimately, it fell through. It wasn't able to work out. They tried to rejig a few things, but obviously it was a little, case of too little, too late. And after the season, they started to reconvene and try to make something work here. Now, there were other teams that did reach out to the Devils about Jacob Markstrom to see if maybe, from a Devils perspective, they wanted to do their due diligence. Markstrom understood this. He was notified of this process. But his priority, his number one, was to go to New Jersey and to join the Devils. He talked about it today of how excited he was to now be part of this organization. There were other teams that were in the mix, at least from an interest perspective, Toronto, Ottawa, and at least one other. My understanding, obviously, preferred to go to Jersey versus an organization, a market like Ottawa. But he ends up with the Devils and something that he's, again, clearly excited about, and something that they were able to get to the finish line on this deal with a little bit of retention, not as much as they were requesting during the season. And Calgary gets a sound young defenseman they're really high on, who's controllable, and a first-round pick next year.
All right, so you got Markstrom at 34, 2 years left on the deal. You mentioned Calgary's retaining a little bit of the salary.
Yeah.
Do you think that he will be extended at some point with the Devils soon, or do you think they're going to see how it plays out?
I think they're gonna look to see how this kind of plays out. I think the tandem right now that they have between Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen, who they got from the Montreal Canadiens prior to the deadline earlier on in March, on a deal in which the Canadiens are retaining a chunk on his deal. You're looking at just over $6 million now that's going towards both Jacob Markstrom and Jake Allen. They wanted to have a veteran presence there as a backup to alleviate any pressure from whomever they thought was going to be the number one. Now, they wanted, obviously, Markstrom to happen. They get this done today. I believe this morning is when things kind of finalized. But they wanted to be in a position where they stabilize their goaltending position. And let's see how the year plays out, the season plays out. They have another year left on that deal. If things work out, then you could probably look towards discussing a shorter-term extension and keeping that relationship going beyond the 2 years he has on this contract. But from New Jersey's perspective, this was a priority. They wanted to address their goaltending. They got it done early before the draft. Now they could focus on both the draft and trying to add an offensive piece up front, which is next order of business from a trades or a roster perspective, I should say, for Tom Fitzgerald and the Devils.
All right, so you got Markstrom going to the Devils. Also today, Pierre-Luc Dubois goes from the Kings to the Caps for Darcy Kemper. You sound surprised. Surprised?
Yeah, one for one. I mean, this surprised a lot of people. I talked to some people in the Kings organization as this was all kind of coming together, and they're going, well, didn't have this on the bingo card for a Wednesday. So they surprised, Rob Blake got some work done here on this one. And I give him credit. It takes a lot to own up to your mistakes. And he paid a big price to get Pierre-Luc Dubois from the Winnipeg Jets last June, ahead of the NHL draft. And it clearly didn't work out. They signed him to that big ticket, $8.5 million cap hit. Didn't work out. They needed to address the goaltending. They get a familiar face in Darcy Kemper, who has experience. He's played with the Kings recently, fits the room, gets well with the rest of the group. And they address the goaltending position from LA side of things. And now they free up an additional $3.25 million in cap space to not only shore up their defense, but also their offense as well. Victor Arvidsson's a pending unrestricted free agent. He's going to test the market. He hasn't closed the door on LA, but he's going to test the market. LA is still engaged in talks with Matt Roy to see if they can work something out. And from Washington's side of things, they got some holes to fill up front. This has been a position, both center and top six, because PLD can move to the wing, that they've wanted to address for the last couple of seasons. That might mean that Nick Backstrom is unlikely to play next season, and that the future of TJ Oshie also kind of up in the air. So they're able to take on the extra cap hit. They get a guy with 7 years left on his contract at 25 years old. They can, again, slot him to the wing or utilize him at center. Both teams understand the parameters dollar-wise in this one. Both teams are pretty happy with the deal.
However, what about the recent track record here, Dave, of Pierre-Luc Dubois? This is his third team in the last 3 years. What do you think seems to be the issue for him behind the scenes, if there are any? Because obviously a player of this talent, very odd to see him being moved so frequently here.
It is, especially at 25. To be shifting off to different teams at this point is certainly alarming. And at the end of the season, he spoke to the media in Los Angeles about what his offseason regimen was going to entail, how intense he wanted to heighten his offseason training, how much he wanted to get back on track. Now, it's going to take a little bit of time, clearly, to adjust to a new environment again. But, sometimes the overall level of effort and output just wasn't there for PLD. And this isn't something that is surprising to a lot of people. Everybody can see it. There are certain moments throughout courses of games where he would just look a little too lax. And that needs to intensify. And going to an environment like Los Angeles, another team with a recent Stanley Cup championship under its belt, with guys like, Tom Wilson and Alexander Ovechkin and John Carlson leading the charge, he's going to get another dose of some veterans that are going to want this guy to get going here pretty quickly. So he's going to have to continue that mindset of increasing his offseason routine and intensifying that in getting ready for next season. He admitted it wasn't good enough. Did he expect a trade? Perhaps. But LA, again, moves on from this one. They're going to have to focus on other areas. And the Capitals, they feel they've deepened their top six.
Do you think Kemper will be the number one goalie for the Kings next year?
It looks like it, yeah. They brought back David Rittich on a one-year deal as their backup. Again, familiar with Darcy Kemper. He's got 3 more years left on his contract. And is a guy that had a little cup of coffee with the Kings, but talking to some people in that organization and a couple players earlier today, they seemed pretty happy about it in terms of the player coming back. So, again, a familiar guy. They get that piece of business done. There was certainly talk of other goaltenders that are out there that LA was poking around on, but they feel comfortable with adding Kemper to the mix. And a player that, again, meshes well with the room. As important as it is now, getting a guy that's going to be talented on the ice, they need to have somebody, all teams want to have somebody that can mesh well in the room and off the ice as well. Kemper certainly fits that. Gets a bit of a shift after a down season with Washington this year. You look at his numbers the previous 3 years, they look great. LA's hoping he gets back to that.
All right, so Kemper's a king, Markstrom's a devil. How about the rest of the goalie trade market? Linus Ullmark maybe on the move soon from the Bruins. What do you think?
Yeah, well, look, he's not the only one. There are certainly other goaltenders that are out there as well. As John Gibson, Anaheim willing to listen to him. UC Saros, Nashville is listening on him. Elvis Merzlikins in Columbus. You can also add Philip Gustafsson in Minnesota to that list. He's available as well. There are other teams that are looking to shore up their goaltending position, Ottawa being one of them. They'd like to move out Joonas Korpisalo if they could, and then kind of go from there. Toronto was poking around, as we mentioned, on Markstrom. I believe there's interest in both Ullmark and Saros. It'd be interesting if the Toronto and Boston could put anything together. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. But Saros is certainly a player that is going to generate more interest along with Linus Ullmark, who has another year left on his. They both have 1 more year left on their contract. Now, with the Bruins likely to sign Jeremy Swayman to an 8-year extension north of $8 million per season, obviously the future there is going to look bleak in terms of anything beyond next season for Linus Ullmark. But UC Saros, is also looking at a deal in and around $8 million to $8.25 million on an AAV on an extension. I don't think Nashville has an appetite to do that, not with Yaro Askarov coming up right behind him. So these are 2 teams, both Boston and Nashville, that could be pretty active here in the next 10 days or so leading into draft, where we may see some more goaltender movement. And again, Minnesota, with respect to Gustafsson, Billy Guerin and the Wild have made it known that he's available. There's going to be a lot more fireworks here over the next few days and in the days leading up to the draft next week.
All right, so we ask, any chance Saros and Ullmark remain with their current teams before opening night next season?
I'd be more surprised if Saros is still there, to be honest, because of how high they are with respect the Predators are with respect to Askarov. The Bruins they don't have a ton of cap space. They've got a little wiggle room, but they've got some holes they want to fill. Nashville has a lot more cap flexibility in terms of potentially adding to their roster. They're a team that's checked in. They want to add up front. They're a team that's checked in on Martin Necas. They want to add to their blue line. Brett Pesce is a player that if he hits July 1 as a free agent, they're going to look to add and certainly inquire about his availability. They even tried to trade for him last offseason from Carolina. So I certainly look to Nashville at looking at a guy like Pesce. But from Boston's perspective, Don Sweeney made it known he wants to add another scorer to his lineup. And they're going to have a couple holes on defense with some guys in the bottom pair leaving. Derek Forbert's going to test the market and others. So if you can move out Ullmark, free up a little additional cap space in that $5 million, and then maybe either address it immediately, another hole, or use that cap space to fill that void elsewhere, I think that's something that the Bruins would like to do. They're exploring it. But Ullmark holds a lot of cards here with a pretty lengthy no trade list. So it'll be interesting to see how the Bruins navigate this over the next 10 days or so.
All right. Also today, Barclay Goodrow, waived yesterday by the Rangers, picked up by the Sharks. My question for you is, if the Sharks wanted Goodrow, why not wait for a potential buyout from the Rangers and then just get Goodrow at a cheaper price?
Well, at that point, you're basically looking at generating a ton more competition out there in the marketplace. If you're looking at this player, and San Jose has made it known, they want to add veteran pieces to the lineup. They're not going to be able to go out because they're going through rebuilds. They're not going to be able to go out and sign top-tier, free agents or anything like that. They want quality caliber players, veteran players that are great room guys, and they're going to help develop some of these young players and mature some of the young players that are coming up. Goodrow's obviously familiar with San Jose. It's a different regime with Mike Grier there leading the charge, but some familiarity with some past players and the captain, Logan Couture, Marc-Edouard Vlasic as well. So there's familiarity there. They like the player. They want to add that presence. They want to add that veteran leadership to the group. They get one bit of business done in taking this on. They have a ton of cap space. They can afford to do it. And again, they eliminate any competition. If there was a potential buyout after the Stanley Cup final, does Goodrow want to go to a contender or to a bottom feeder? Let's be real. San Jose is going to continue their rebuild for the next few years, and that probably would have taken them out of the mix. They take the full cap hit. They bring in this veteran presence that's going to help, they hope, develop some of these younger players that they've got coming up, including potentially, most likely, Macklin Celebrini in after the draft at first overall.
All right, Dave. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, and fingers crossed on your trip to Edmonton.
Please, yes, that would be lovely.
Hopefully,
no more
make
30
it in
hours.
You got to make it in time for Game 6 on Friday night, all right?
That'd be good. Thank you.